This is the Bat Flip Podcast. Now here's your host, Damien, David, and Matt.
Hello and welcome into another season preview edition of the Bat Flip Podcast. I'm Matt here today with David, and today we are going to talk about the New York Mets. Just lovely team to talk about here. So they added the biggest addition of the offseason. Juan Soto came over on a insane contract. Juan Soto is an excellent baseball player. I believe I picked him for our MVP in our season predictions. So that was a big addition. The Mets are coming off a season where they went to the went to the National League Championship Series and got beat by the Dodgers. So they finally got over the hump a little bit and getting into the postseason and winning a series in the postseason for the first time. And I guess it's been about 10 years since they made that World Series run and they played the Royals. So they've really struggled to get there and to win games there. But last year was a little bit of a different story. This is a franchise that the ownership change a few years ago really sparked their payroll and their spending. They brought in Steve Cohen, became the new owner, bought it from the Wilpons, and he got he's just spent a ton of money. I mean, he's done it a lot of different ways, and but they've been one of the more aggressive franchises in baseball. But there's some things about this team that still give you a little bit of caution this year too.
Yep.
So, David, what do you think the overall state of the New York Mets franchise is?
This is there's excitement. I think I think this team is set up for some success this season. But I think the success might be a little bit limited because you're a team that went out and spent the most money ever on a free agent in one offseason on Juan Soto, and then we mentioned it when Juan Soto was signed was if the Mets are going to do this, they need to add more around Juan Soto. They can't waste his best years on teams that aren't World Series caliber. I fear they might have done that here. The offseason after Juan Soto was pretty underwhelming, and we'll get into it here, but I don't know that this team is a World Series favorite. I would say they're probably a playoffs favorite, but
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm taking this team very far in the playoffs, and we'll get into why. That's odd to say coming from the team that, like you said, signed the best player available. Like that should be enough, especially for a team that's coming off an NLCS. But I don't know, man. That doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like I'm very confident in them returning to that level.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you, and a lot went right for this team last year too, and we'll talk about that, here in just a second. But yeah, we'll move on and we'll go ahead and talk about what they did this offseason. And of course, it all starts with Juan Soto. He's a superstar, 26 years old. He was excellent for the Yankees last year. Obviously, he was really good for the Padres year before last, and before that with the Nationals. He's won a World Series. He's been to the playoffs several times. He's got a lot of experience there. Um, there's not a lot of things. Well, he's been to 2 World Series actually after last year. There's not a lot of bad things you can say about Juan Soto. I mean, the defense isn't great, but that's really the only thing you can even. I mean, he's incredible bat. I mean, it's really an incredible bat, and that addition is obviously the biggest addition of the offseason for any team, and it's a huge pickup for the Mets. You look at the rest of this here: Frankie Montas, Clay Holmes. I can group those together because they are both going to be starters. And Frankie Montas obviously was going to be a starter, but Clay Holmes has been the closer for the Mets. I mean, for the Yankees the last couple of years, and now he's a starter for the Mets, and not just a starter; he's their opening day starter. So that is something to watch out for. And that's kind of rings a little bit of an alarm bell for the Mets, I think. But but Clay Holmes is also a really talented. We've seen this the last few years. Former relievers who have a certain profile that are able to remake themselves as starters and do it very well. We've seen it with Reynaldo Lopez. We've seen it with Michael King. We've seen it with Jordan Hicks. This is a pattern of things that teams are doing right now that, it could work out. So they brought in Griffin Canning for pitching depth, which he's currently listed as their number 2 starter on Fangraphs. I don't think that he's really their number 2, but that's how they have it listed. AJ Minter they brought in as a reliever. We'll see. He dealt with some injuries last year. I think there was some concern about bringing him back with the injuries he dealt with for the Braves. But the Mets brought him in, and he's been a very good reliever for a long time. Nick Madrigal, David's favorite player, is
Oh yeah.
big league deal. And then they traded for Jose Siri from the Tampa Bay Rays. So,
Yep.
David, I think obviously Juan Soto kind of speaks for itself. Any of the other ads that you were high on or low on?
I don't like just about any of them. I will say they brought back Sean Manaea
Yeah,
from
that
last season, and
yeah,
that's not going to be an ad because Manaea was already on the team. They did sign him to a contract in free agency. That's decent, but Manaea's already hurt, right? And you're banking on quite a bit going right when it comes to Clay Holmes, and I mean I don't even think Montas was a better signing than Holmes. And they spent more money on. I guess they didn't spend more money on Holmes. It's right around the same total value, but those two guys are guys that I'm not going to trust in free agency. And there's some stuff to like, but
yeah,
almost none of these ads besides Soto are ads I would say are that of a quality like World Series hunting team. Like if you had Holmes and you know I can't even think of like a good middle rotation. Maybe Jack Flaherty would have fit this team really nicely where he could have slotted in with Clay Holmes there at the top of the
yeah.
rotation
I'm
with
with you.
Sean Manaea. But and he ended up going for really cheap too, right around the same as Montas. Like you give me Jack Flaherty instead of Montas. Even if Flaherty gets hurt, I feel better about the decision making
Yeah.
process that went into
Well,
that.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say Frankie Montas is hurt, so
Right.
like,
Right.
he's
So
got he's not even throwing yet. I mean, it's a lat, so it's not something that should keep him out for the year.
mhm,
But it's still he's already banged up, and he's had a pattern of injuries as well. So I'm with you on they should have gone after a guy like a Jack Flaherty or somebody more of that caliber than Frankie Montas. And and then I'll say one more thing, and we'll probably talk more about this with the pitchers. But if these moves do work out this year, the Mets are going to start getting the benefit of the doubt on pitching moves because I didn't like their
right.
pitching moves last year either. Definitely didn't like Severino, and I didn't like Manaea that much. I think y'all liked him a lot more than me. Um, but those moves really worked out for them last year. They both were excellent.
hmm
So I think that that's something to kind of look out for with this team is that they have started to have some good fortune with reclamation projects or getting guys to unlock something.
Yep.
But we'll see if they're able to do that with this current group. But we can look at their subtractions here. They lost Harrison Bader. He was a kind of a platoon center fielder for them last year. Shintaro Fujinami came over at the deadline. He didn't do a whole lot. Luis Severino, big loss there. If you threw him in this rotation, you feel a lot better about it too.
hmm
He signed with the A's, and
Yeah.
he was really good for them last year. And even if you don't believe in him going forward, the production is lost from him that he put
hmm
up. And Jose Iglesias is kind of the same way, where you believe that. I mean, you may not believe in him. I don't really believe in him, but that's 2.5 wins above replacement and a 130 something WRC plus that you're losing from your roster. And that's one of those things I mentioned earlier. They had a lot go right for them last year. Guys like Jose Iglesias having an insane season that he's not going to do again.
Yep.
That was some of the stuff that went right for them last year. So that's definitely a big one. Brooks Raley, another reliever that they lost. They lost JD Martinez. So that's kind of interesting. He did not have a great year for them last year, but he was still an above average hitter. Um, it sounds like he's still a free agent, and it
Yeah.
sounds like he might end up retiring. Um,
Wow.
he might end up being a pickleball player, which is the report that came out. He said that was going to be his next thing. Was he's going to try to be a professional? So that's interesting. But moving on, Jose Quintana, another guy that pitched pretty well for them last year, that they're losing the production from. Adam Ottavino has been there a while. Kind of a fine seventh inning guy, and Phil Maton, they declined his option. But David, I guess you know these these subtractions, I don't think they quite add up to the additions they made because Juan Soto just kind of takes care of that.
hmm
But this probably the guys that they lost, this kind of limits them from That being just from this just being an excellent offseason, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they didn't lose a whole lot. I think the pitching is the biggest problem here, right? We'll get
Yeah.
into it with the pitching, but Quintana and Severino are the big losses,
Yeah.
and the replacements therein, I don't know that they're going to equal that. And even because Juan Soto is such a focal point of the offseason anyway, this team can definitely build around it. David Stearns is, originally the Brewers guy. This is, the Brewers strategy of kind of mixing and matching players in the pitching staff to get optimal success. That's something that, you mentioned it being potentially viable. Dropping out guys that are pretty good. That's the Brewers strategy. It's been the Brewers strategy for years, right? Is push away guys who, let guys go in free agency, find new guys. Griffin Canning might just be that guy. He might be next year's Luis Severino, a injury reclamation that overperforms and then goes away in free agency. And that feels like the type of thing that David Stearns could employ. And then you've coupled that with the monetary muscle that Cohen brings to get a Juan Soto onto that team. I mean, it's something that could work out where this subtractions list does not feel very impactful to me. With the exceptions of the rotation. But like you said, if they can figure out a way to get those rotation pieces refilled behind and backfilled, it can work.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. But I guess we can move on to talk about their bats here real quick. Um, we've
Let's go
got
from
Yeah, we got Brandon Nimmo out in left field. A really good on base guy. Been solid for a long time there. Jose Siri in center. He's interesting. He hits the ball really hard and he's super athletic, but he has strikeout problems in the worst way. And, he's a little bit Michael A. Taylor-ish as a player. He does bring a little bit of spark. He's real entertaining, but yeah, he's definitely I don't know. That's an interesting trade. Like that's an interesting. If you're
polarizing.
relying, yeah, he's polarizing. That's the right
Yep.
word for it. Obviously, Juan Soto we talked about in right field is one of the best players in the game.
Mhm.
You've got Vientos at third. He's another player that's pretty polarizing. He had a really good rookie year last year. I guess he might not have technically been a rookie, but um, it was technically his second year. But there were some red flags in his profile too.
Mhm.
So that's a guy that's going to be pretty polarizing going into the season. Francisco Lindor at shortstop is obviously elite. He's really 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 good.
Yep.
They currently have with the injury to Jeff McNeil, and I went ahead and listed the WAR projections on these injuries because they're pretty impactful ones. But
Mhm.
with him out, it looks like Brett Beatty is going to play second base, and I mean, I don't feel good about that. If I'm a Mets fan, like
He's
he's been
leading the
rough.
grapefruit. He's leading the grapefruit league in OPS right now. So
Yeah, well, he did that last year too, and he had a 83 WRC plus last year in 50 games. The year before last, he had a 67 WRC plus in 108 games.
maybe
So
the swing changes are finally meaningful.
we'll see. But Pete Alonso at first, he's honestly he's another polarizing player.
Yeah.
No pun on the polar bear, but um, intended. But yeah, he's a polarizing player as well. He hits a lot of home runs, but there's a lot of red flags in his profile too over the
Yep.
last couple of years that showed some regression. He's up to 30 years old, and there's a reason that teams were not super thrilled to give him a huge contract that he wanted in free
Mhm.
agency, even though he's been a very productive player over his whole career. But
Yep.
they got Jesse Winker at DH. I'm sure he's going to be some form of platoon here.
Yeah.
But he's a really good on base guy. He's going to get on base at a 350 clip pretty regularly. Doesn't do a whole lot else, but good at that. When you've got some of these bats here like Soto and Lindor and Vientos
Mhm.
potentially, getting a guy on base is usually a big deal. Um, Luis Torrens behind the plate. That's another spot they have injuries. Francisco Alvarez has a hamate bone, which is a pretty
Oof.
tough injury. That's something that guys sometimes struggle when they first come back from that. So we'll see if Alvarez. Hopefully he gets healthy soon and he's able
Yep.
to come back and hit the ground running when he gets back. But yeah, I mean this position player core to me has a couple of really high end players. Like they've got 2 MVP candidates here, but then
Mhm.
I think they lack depth. I really do. So do you kind of feel the same way about them?
I wouldn't if the McNeil and Alvarez were in there. I wouldn't necessarily feel that. I think Beatty is a pretty reasonable guy to bring in. He's young. He's still got some upside, some former top prospect pedigree. The catcher situation is alarming. If if Alvarez misses more than I think he'll probably miss like 4 to 6 weeks is usually a handmade bone, but like that's very alarming. That where their catcher situation is sitting right now.
Yeah.
I wonder if they shouldn't bring in like a Yasmani Grandal. I think is still in free agency. That might make it feel a little better. But oh man, I do. I think the overarching theme here is that the good players here are going to play well, right? I trust Brandon Nimmo to be a great on base guy. Juan Soto is going to produce. I think 6.6 WAR is hilarious, given that I think he's gotten 7 like 3 years in a row. Like it's just I don't think Juan Soto is going to go over that 6.6. He's kind of unlocked the star potential that we always knew he had. Lindor at 5.9 is also pretty funny coming off an 8 WAR season. Like I think these guys are going to overperform the projections. We just went through the Astros and they were we didn't really see anything past the projections that those guys were going to reach. Vientos is
Yeah.
another guy where look, he could regress a little bit. I think there's also a 5 to 6 WAR guy in Vientos, right? If he's able to progress and playing the field at third base, there's a ton of upside there. The platoon at DH might work out really well for them, and it also might open up a spot, for them to be aggressive on the trade block to go add another bat where Jesse Winker and Starling Marte might not be necessarily be getting it done, but you might be able to pull in a DH there where that's kind of the spot that JD Martinez opened up last year. I like this. I like this position player group a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very good. It's going to offset a lot of the concerns that you're presenting, and I know you're presenting them from the Braves fan perspective. Yeah, it's gonna the good players here are gonna offset those concerns for sure for me. I really, really like this roster from a position player perspective. I think it's playoff caliber, it's World Series caliber. With Juan Soto's leadership, you wonder if maybe he reins in Jose Siri, brings him to
Yeah, we'll see.
up to the level of everybody else. I think there are some concerns here, but to me, they're so limited because you've got so many skilled and talented players, the leadership of Lindor and Soto. This feels like a team that can definitely make another run in the playoffs. How far is the big question, and that's where I think we're about to go into the limiting factor here, which is the pitching.
Yeah, it is, and and like I said, depth a little bit too here. The bench isn't great. We'll see. Starling Marte is still there.
I like Starling
I mean,
Marte. Tyrone Taylor's pretty good.
I think they'll probably factor in with Jesse Winker there because he doesn't hit
Mhm.
lefties.
Right.
And then the prospects, Jet Williams is interesting. He might be up this year. He's going to start in AAA. We'll see about that.
If series stinks, Williams comes up.
Yeah,
I think is the key.
I could see that. He did struggle in the minors last year. He really didn't play a lot in the minors. He must have had some injuries or something,
Yeah.
but he didn't play a ton there. But when he played, he struggled a little bit. So we'll see if he's able to break out here in AAA and get
Mhm.
up to the big leagues. And Drew Gilbert's also a former top draft pick that they brought in. I believe he came in the
Verlander trade.
Verlander trade, which is just we talked about the Astros in the last one
Mhm.
recorded, and that trade was terrible for the Astros. So
Yeah.
I mean, that was really terrible. Even if it doesn't work out with Gilbert, and the process on that one was bad. So
The other guy in that trade, I think we could have thrown in the prospects to know. Ryan Clifford walks at like an 18% rate, hits home runs, strikes out a lot, but he's the kind of mold that could certainly thrive in this system
yeah,
where a 3 true outcomes guy, he did some home runs, strike out a bunch. He could thrive on this bench this season if he could take maybe a step forward in the contact area.
yeah,
But this team is set up very well because any of those 3 guys could also be dealt for major
yeah,
league pieces here. It's a good spot.
yeah, absolutely. So we can move on and talk quickly about the pitching here. We've got this is where the concerns are going to be for
Yeah.
me. The main concerns. I do like their position player group, but Clay Holmes. We're going to find out about Clay Holmes here. like I've said, this has been a strategy that has worked for teams. It's worked for several different guys, going reliever to starter. But we'll see with Clay Holmes if he's able to do it. Um, they're putting a lot of eggs in that basket, and
Mhm.
the Mets, as I mentioned last year, they seem to be with their new front office a team that can do this. They can go find
Mhm.
guys that are kind of unexpected to be, you know, good signings that end up being
Mhm.
good signings. Last year we talked about Severino and to a certain level Manaea as well. Like Quintana was another guy they signed last year that everyone was like,
Mhm.
I don't know about this one, and he ended up being good.
Mhm.
So I think Clay Holmes could be in that mold. But the rest of this, I mean, Kodai Senga is interesting. He's got walk
Yep.
problems and he had injury problems last year,
Yep.
but he's still a talented pitcher.
Yep.
Got good stuff. He's got that gyro ball that he can throw. The ghost fork that he can throw. I'm getting
Yep.
getting them mixed up, but he he's
Yep.
he's obviously got an elite pitch, but last year he only pitched 5 innings in the regular season, and we'll see if he's able to come back and throw well this year. He's gonna have to work on his control a little bit. He's also 32 years old, so
Mhm.
that's something to look out for with him as well. As a hard thrower, David Peterson, he's fine, I guess. If he's your number 5, you don't feel bad about that, but he's probably your third best pitcher here,
Mhm.
and the other two are just not anything to write home about. With McGill and Canning, Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas. I don't believe in Frankie Montas at all.
Mhm.
Sean Manaea, I think, had a great year last year. I think he might have been a little bit better last year than maybe what I would expect for him going forward. But if they can get him back pretty early, add him in, you might be able to get to this rotation. If Holmes works out, you might be able to get this rotation to a level that can really that cannot limit the upside of this team with as good as their
Mhm.
offense is.
Yeah, I think there's stuff to like here. Obviously, I think, is this finally the year David Peterson puts it all together? He's had such good stuff and he's been like the fifth, sixth guy for the Mets for like 4 or 5 seasons now, and he's just never been able to
Yeah.
get it together where he can actually be a reliable starter. Maybe this is finally the year. I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to bet on that, but he's been like really close and one of those guys that I always feel like maybe he'll break out, and then he doesn't. I think Griffin Canning 2 years ago was a really good like, he's a guy that you feel like got ruined by the Angels, and I thought for sure when he went to the Braves last year that was gonna be something huge. Actually, did he get cut from the Braves after they traded for him?
The
That was
Braves
this offseason, right?
non-tendered him. Yeah.
Right. So Griffin Canning's first year without the Angels is going to be here with the Mets. I've been very interested in him as a potential reclamation project because this is his first year without the Mets. Or without the Angels, infecting him with terrible everything. He's gonna have some legitimate pitching, process here, and he's got good stuff. I don't know that I believe in it. The Braves didn't believe in it, and that's a team that I really respect with regard to their decision making process. But the Mets definitely can use a guy like Griffin Canning here. It's one of those. This is a typical David Stearns move. Feels
Yeah.
really, really like sharp, where they'll get more out of Griffin Canning than anybody else will, and then they'll let him go in free agency, and he'll be kind of a bust after that because they won't be able to replicate that same process. That's a very Brewers thing to happen. I think when you slot Manaea in here, the rotation looks fine, but it doesn't look like that World Series contender rotation that we've been talking about with regard to this
Yeah.
team.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. If we're getting to a point in these season previews where every team here you're looking for reasons why they wouldn't be a World Series contender. More
Mhm.
so than looking for reasons why they could be better than you expect. And I think that's kind of what we're
Right.
looking at here. Is just this is a major limiting factor for this team at this stage.
Yep.
Looking at their bullpen, they got Edwin Diaz still at the closer role. He's still very good. He was not as good last year as he has been,
Mhm.
coming off of the injury that he had. Obviously, 2022 was like the most insane closer year we've ever seen. So expecting him to repeat that was probably never going to happen. But 2024, he had a 3.52 ERA. The walks were up, the velocity was down, the home runs were up. But he was still an excellent closer. Even that being said,
Yep.
I mean, his peripherals were still good. Um, I still believe in Edwin Diaz. AJ Minter comes over, and AJ Minter, last year the injuries were really a problem for him. He had hip issues, which is a weird
Yeah.
injury to have. Gave up a lot of home runs last year. His swing and miss stuff was down, major down. The walks were similar. Like you know, AJ Minter is an awesome reliever. He's been great for the
Mhm.
Braves. I was not alarmed when the Braves let him walk
Yeah.
because of the injury issues he had last year. He had a negative WAR last year too.
Yeah.
But AJ Minter still got good. If he's healthy, fully healthy,
Mhm.
then his stuff is still really good, and he could be very very good for the Mets as that kind of lefty guy to complement Diaz. But once you get beyond that, Reed Garrett's had a really good year last year. He's interesting still. I don't know that I fully believe in him. He struggled down the stretch last year.
Yeah.
And and then the rest of this isn't very good. I mean, Butos, Stanek, Young, Kranick. It feels like there's some depth challenges here. Then you've got Paul Blackburn down there, who they traded for a couple years ago, and he's the only guy. And I wanted to point him out because he's the only guy in this projected rotation or bullpen right now that's projected to have a walk rate under 3 walks per nine.
Yeah.
So there's some walk issues with this team too.
Yeah, I like Budo and Garrett. Okay, I think they're really solid middle relievers. Minter's injury issues concerned me from a free agency, perspective. Where when I was hoping the Cubs were going to chase guys, I was like, I like Minter, I probably believe in him, but like that injury, the hip really worries me. Um, yeah, I think this is a perfect candidate to go out and bring in some middle relief help in the middle of the season. It doesn't alarm me because this bullpen has the upside in the back end. It's got good relievers, which is what you need. But if you can go out and grab like an eighth inning setup guy, that'll solve these worries. I don't think this is the limiting factor, like we said, when it comes to this team
Yeah,
being a World Series contender.
the
You'll have
rotation.
your really good relievers in the postseason.
Yep.
Yeah, it's still rotation.
Yeah. And a couple prospects to know. Brandon Sproat, he's a really good
He's good.
prospect. He
Yep.
really struggled in AAA after he got moved up a level last year in a small sample size, but his AA numbers were insane. So
Mhm.
I like Brandon Sproat. Blade Tidwell is also a guy that's got a lot of hype. He was a pretty high draft pick a couple years ago. I believe he came out of Tennessee. He was one of those
Mhm.
Tennessee guys on that really good team that they had. But he struggled a little bit in AAA as well. But he's shown some flashes in the minor leagues, and AA last year was really good. So we'll see. Those guys probably still need a little bit more seasoning. But as we mentioned with this rotation, they could probably factor in some way. But looking at the outlook here, over under win total is 90.5. So David, you taking the over or under?
I'm probably right there. Probably right at 90. I'll go over. I think this is a World Series contender. I'm going to stick with that. I just, I can't not trust David Stearns to make the midseason moves necessary to drive this team into the playoffs and drive them into a World Series contention. They're just playing in the toughest division in baseball, and that just makes things really difficult.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm taking the under, but barely. I think this team is a
Mhm.
playoff team. I've got them picked to be in the playoffs, but this division is extremely difficult. You've got the Braves and the Phillies here as well, who I think are both a little bit better. And somebody's not going to win 95
Mhm.
games. So I think
Right.
the Mets probably with their pitching issues limits them to being just under, but I do think they make the playoffs. I've got them as my number 3 wild card, and we'll see if they're able to do that. But they're favorite to make the playoffs. Their odds to win the NL East are pretty good. World Series odds are really good for a team that's not projected to win their division. So, David, any final thoughts?
That's it, man. I 91, 92 wins, good spot in the trade block with good prospects, great pitching stat, a great team, like position player team, solid pitching, could be better. That's a limiting factor for this team.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you next time.